What is going on, YouTube? Coming at you live from the Arsenal of Democracy, Detroit, Michigan, where we are going to shoot a downtown showdown on the brand new Renegade Games giant Axis&Allies Global 40 map. It's going to be great. My new friend, Brad, a follower of this channel who met me here on YouTube, is meeting me here in downtown Detroit to throw down with a new setup, Global 1942, a Larry Harris scenario I've not tried before on this map, but the advantage of it is that it's hopefully going to be something we can finish in an actual day. But it's early morning here as we set up the board. I'll be back to talk about the setup. All right, we're back with the initial setup of the board as previewed. This is the 1942 scenario, originally designed by Larry Harris as a set of tournament rules to make the game go a little smoother, make it feel a little bit like 1942 on a 1940 board. With some modifications from my friend Brad here, and he's going to jump in, talk about his design philosophy a little bit, why he made the tweaks that he did. But just a little survey here of the initial setup. You see the philosophy here a little bit in terms of the modifications is to kind of make it feel like it would after 5 or 6 turns of global, and I think from my assessment it roughly approximates that. It's going to obviously depend on how a player plays, but the general breakdown here is not dissimilar to what you would find in that situation. But if you're familiar with 40, you're going to notice that there's some differences. The play has progressed a little bit. Everybody's at war. If you're familiar with the 42 global scenario, you're going to see a few tweaks. And Brad, tell us about those.
Yeah, so basically what this is Larry Harris's 1942 scenario that was designed for tournament play. Obviously, Global 40 is a great game, and my group, we grew up playing it. We loved it. The problem that we had with it was it just takes so long, and there's so many pieces. And so I discovered this probably 4 years ago now, and I love it. The problem I had was that I'm not sure why Larry Harris did this. No disrespect to him, of course, but I'm not sure why he changed the turn order of Global 40. He changed the turn order of this from Global 40. So normally Germany goes first and then the Soviet Union. He switched those. I don't know if that was to represent the kind of classic order of Axis&Allies. And so what I did was change the turn order back to Global 40, which meant that the Eastern Front was really the main thing that had to change because Germany was just way too strong. When you design a game for Russia to go first and you switch it, there's got to be balancing changes. And so most of what I did was to add some additional Russian pieces where there already were pieces. So back here you can see there's a little bit more infantry. Maybe if you want, you could even put the Larry Harris setup in the description or whatever so they could compare. But there's more infantry here. Stalingrad has been beefed up quite a bit, but most of the territories for Russia are unchanged, with the exception of what I just said. Germany's completely the same. There's a couple changes down here. This was more just for income, to help Italy and take away from Germany a bit. You'll see that like the British start off with the Middle East. That's kind of a balancing thing to help them hold Cairo and India a bit. India's really, really weak in this version. China's pretty weak as well. So just kind of a slight adjustment to his tournament version. Overall, it's really close.
I think he threw a couple anti-aircraft guns up in Siberia too, right?
Yep, that's kind of a reflection of what Global 40 starts off with. So like I say, there's just a few kind of continuity additions to make this feel like Global 1940 at the beginning of round 6.
Okay. And for those following along at home, the white chips are 1, gray chips are 2, reds 5, greens 10, just like Chris and I normally play. So that's what the colored chips reflect. And without further ado, let's dive in. Halfway through turn 1, my first cycle as the Axis in this 1942 scenario. And things have so far gone basically how I had hoped them to go. We'll see if the rest of the game bears out that those were good choices. But in any event, here with Japan, I threw a couple planes into this mix along with the Navy that was in New Britain to take the U.S. Navy in 49. Why did I do that? Well, because there are 4 infantry and artillery that are now stranded in the Solomon Islands for a good while until the U.S. can find a way to pick them up with no other transports in sight. This is a battleship and a transport that was just too good to pass up, and intentionally killed one of the planes that was in that fight so that my carrier, which was hanging out there till non-com movement, didn't have to wait and pick it up, because I really didn't want to go there. I wanted it to go here, which was in C-Zone 36. I still got to chip this up, but this is where I kind of non-commed everything, built a Navy and air base there. A little bit painful because this setup already gives me an embarrassment of naval bases, so to build another one, feels a bit wasteful, but, we do what we think we must. A little progress into China, nothing surprising that way. On the German-Russian front, the primary thrust here was to fortify Ukraine and to take Bryansk, which I did. Of course, he took it back. But I took Bryansk in order to keep all that armor in Russia from being able to pour into Ukraine. He's obviously still intent on taking it, building up in Volgograd and in Rostov here as much as possible. These are some red chips starting to get on the board. Other objective here, to take Novgorod, which we did, and looks like we're going to hold on to that one for a bit. Vyborg as well was important, because if not having done that, he could have took out my transport and landed a plane there. So we took that. He actually made a really smart defensive move, scrambled a plane from Novgorod into that C-Zone 115, took out my cruiser, came uncomfortably close to taking out the transport as well. Other move this way, subs shot into 119, again, because there was a battleship and a transport there that were ripe for the taking and just too good to pass up before they had a chance to pal around with other naval ships. So we shot some subs and some planes out there. In order for those planes to land, we built a carrier and expanding the fleet a little bit that way. This was a nail biter over here with like 15 different rolls until I finally killed something, but took that naval compartment out there in Canada. And now it's time to see what the Allies do in this scenario. Beginning of turn 2, we see what the Allies had in mind. They've taken Wake Island with some force there, and the Gilberts as well with the Anzac troops. As expected, the Japanese fleet in 49 is gone, and Americans pursuing a cautious island hopping policy on this side of the board. You'll see only one build in the Pacific. There's a reason for that. The Indians have gotten out of Dodge and are somewhere near the Antarctic right now, as they leave their brethren in Calcutta behind. It's still building what they can, not making it easy for the Japanese, but saving that fleet for another day, as it were. The UK in Europe has beefed itself up in Egypt, pulling everything back that it can, while the Americans quickly starting to build that Atlantic fleet, putting just about all their builds here. We see a multinational force already forming in C-Zone 91. Little party happening in Gibraltar, and some Strat bombers piling up in London. You'll see already some damage taking place. We had a strategic bombing raid in the air base in West Germany. It went terribly for the Germans. One of the intercepting planes was killed, and then he rolled a max of 6 damage on the air base. So why the air base? Well, I guess we'll see. That's a strategic choice that he had in mind. A couple convoys didn't do jack for the Germans. And the Italians, well, they broke out. They got rid of the cruiser, which had been moved up to 99, but lost its own cruiser in the process. Has a naked transport out there in 99, and built a couple more here in the Adriatic. Already questioning those decisions for Italy, but hey, it's early in the game. And here goes round 2. Halfway through turn 2, the Pacific is relatively quiet. A bit of repositioning here for Japan. So we've gone underwater and gotten a bunch of subs for Japan to hold off, any fleet that might try to come this way, but there's not a lot of action towards the Japanese homeland yet. This fleet didn't really go far, split off a little bit to take care of this runaway cruiser. Opted not to do any bombing raids or anything, but did position troops closer to Calcutta. Otherwise, buying a factory now in Vietnam and those subs pretty much on the German front. However, quite a bit of carnage. So somehow Germany still owns Ukraine, and that's only due to the prudence of Russia in pulling back its tanks. So Ukraine was full of almost everything that Germany could put into it. I say almost because there's a couple of things I could have done differently to get a few more pieces in there, though honestly not sure it would have mattered. But there was a ton of stuff in there, doing the best we could to hold Ukraine. Russia saw it as a now or never move to take out that stack, and it did take down that stack. So that took out a few planes, attack, a whole bunch of tanks, a whole bunch of guys, everything that I had built there. So that was quite a bit of bloodbath, and he pulled back all his planes, and that's 10. No, sorry, that's a stack of 10 tanks, which includes the 4 that had come down from Moscow. So that's his wad right there, but he's still got it left to shoot. Meanwhile, Germany's building up here. And so it's still got strength on the board, but its southern strength has been neutered. Its advancement there certainly stopped in its tracks. We're doing a little bit of a gutsy thing here, throwing these units into France, pissing away our transports. Hopefully that's worthwhile, and the Allies don't make me regret all these moves here on the rest of turn 2. Well, it's the beginning of turn 3, and mostly repositioning, some modest combat on this half of the turn. The Americans kind of building up in power here, coordinating with their Anzac brethren to create a pretty good sized fleet here in the Pacific. You see most of the builds in the Pacific this time around, with a little destroyer kind of heading towards the Panama Canal. The Anzacians have flown a plane to reinforce Calcutta, which has otherwise just turtled. Over on the European side, the British have elected to tactically withdraw from Egypt, which allowed Italy to walk in. Amazingly enough, both of those naked transports in the Mediterranean survived because we gave those British planes enough else to do. Now, they put them to good use. There was a big invasion in Syria, stopped the combined German-Italian Axis invasion force there. At some heavy cost, though, all of the land units, that's why it's still under Italy control, all of the land units died. A couple planes left, and they fell back to what is now the British factory in Persia. So, the British are not out. There are certainly these dudes marching up from the south, and we've got guys now building up in the Middle East. So they've pulled back, but are not out of the fight. The Americans also, building up a bit of a navy, but doing an ugly thing up here in Norway, which taking advantage of the empty territory that I left there for them. So that is unfortunate, but hitting Germany when they're down. Let's see if they can pick themselves back up on turn 3. Now halfway through turn 3, and Japan is happy. It's accomplished its goal of taking Calcutta. 1 land unit left and lost a couple planes, but the rolls went better than they could have. I'd say slightly better than average, and we're happy with the result. So that's 1 down. Starting to build up a little bit here in 36 as well as C-Zone 6 for what comes next. Continuing to gobble up China bit by bit. And on the German front, we've had some pulling back. So in order to reposition the units that were left, we actually abandoned both Novgorod and Ukraine. So now Russia's back in control of both of those factories, which is unfortunate. This big stack of Russian units in Smolensk is built up to be an equal and opposite threat to the one source of aggression left from Germany, which is in Belarus. So 2 adjacent stacks here, while Russia's got enough to hold on to Ukraine this time. 1 dude taking Novgorod, that's fine. But what did Germany do? Well, it was retrenching all its land units. Well, it built 6 bombers with its build, and giving itself some offensive flexibility there, but taking a hit on the land defense as a result. Will the Allies take advantage of that situation here in the rest of turn 3? Beginning of turn 4, and things are getting real. So the U.S. is not making any bones about its investment in the Pacific now. That's 3 carrier groups and a lot of regrouping for the Allies in the Pacific. So that's 2 groups in Hawaii, 1 just built in Western U.S., and there's a 4th of ragtag additional allies here down in the Australian waters. But taken together, that's quite a lineup of ships to confront the Japanese, knowing that now the Japanese have taken care of Calcutta. They've only got the rest of the Pacific in their sights. So they're at this point ahead of Japan a little bit in the naval race, even if you add that all up. And Japan not nearly in the position it needs to be to take on that fleet as of yet. China kind of holing up in the corner up there with making its final stand. And on the European side of the board, the UK making a pretty bold maneuver here, sending all of its air force and this destroyer to take out the lone battleship and 2 transports that Italy left there. Probably in retrospect should have beefed that up with the German destroyer. Wonder though if that would even made a difference. The result though is that the Air Force was parked here in Transjordan, thusly taken out by the Italians. Italians digging deep, building a factory in Egypt, being there to stay. The South African conga line working its way up the continent, while we have both Americans and British working their way over here, even the French down from West Africa. So they're coming from all over Africa to throw down in Cairo. Allies kind of throwing their weight around here in the rest of the Mediterranean as well, and the Italians kind of getting out of dodge, getting in the corner there. One move I misplayed compared to what I had intended to do. We can talk about that perhaps later, but it may actually, the more I think about it, end up being the better move anyway. Not to be left out, though, is the story of the little British bomber that could. You'll see it up here parked in Norway with the rest of the Ally invaders. That's a lot of fire. That is max damage on the factory in Germany, 20 damage, as well as 10 in Western, and that airbase blown up. That's a lot of smoke going on, and that is largely due to that little British bomber right there, who has come in here like 4 times now.
3, I believe.
3 times, because there's only been 3 turns, but each of these turns has come through, not gotten shot down, and somehow rolled max damage every single time, rolling a stinking 6 on that die. So backed up by the American bombers, that's a whole lot of structural damage that's being done here. Will it slow down Germany's advance on turn 4? Halfway through turn 4, and it has been a doozy for the Axis. Not so much Japan, it's just kind of doing its thing, spending a ton of money, and reconstituting its navy, kind of regrouping along the Pacific line now, still pulling back from Calcutta, building up where we can, building things in both of these factories down yonder. Going for the gusto here in China, but was thwarted at this last territory where the Russians had thrown in everything that they could, Chinese built up everything they could, and Japan had to retreat after losing all its land units and a couple planes. So that's what we're left with there. Last stand still in Kinsu, which was something. They've still got 7 guys in a plane there, so the Chinese aren't going anywhere anytime soon, even though they're getting 1 IPC a turn. But on the European map, Germany's master plan that it kind of conceived a couple turns ago, really the last ditch effort to get the Allies off its territory, at least came to fruition and came off nicely. That was throwing all the land units, all the planes, all the bombers we could into Norway to kick the Ally invaders out, and we did that handily. So now we've got a decent sized land force, free factory, and more importantly, that dang British bomber is gone. So that lack of that bomber could swing the game by itself. But right now the Allies are looking pretty neutered up in the Atlantic, which is good because Russia is going gangbusters. Really kind of pushing now to my border, going in large part past where the starting divide had been. I've got Novgorod and a couple territories up there, but they're pushing through hard on the south. So let's see if the Allies can build on that momentum the rest of turn 4. Oh, that's not right. Now turn 5, and the action continues. U.S. slowly sticking some feelers out here, taking out my little blocker destroyer, but otherwise hanging tight in Hawaii while continuing to build everything in the Pacific. Yet another carrier fleet, a 4th carrier fleet for the Americans. The Southern Allies here stretching their wings a little bit. So between the 3 of them, they've been able to take back New Guinea and finally get Anzac's bonus, so it's getting a +5. While China taking out the AA gun I forgot to move and getting all the way back up to 3 IPCs. UK retrenching a bit, afraid of the Air Force there in Egypt, so it retracted back to the Congo, giving me the chance to build up some subs, one of which was later taken out by the French destroyer in Madagascar. And I'm going to need those because the Allied fleet has chosen to commit itself over here to Crete, wiping out the navy that I unfortunately was forced to leave there. We can say now, I think, that I had intended to get rid of that British destroyer, stick that carrier and the German boats into the Red Sea, get them away from the Allies, but alas, I didn't play that correctly, and the Allies took me up on it, so they wiped out that fleet. That's an unfortunate waste of an aircraft carrier, but you know, they did their job. They brought the Allies into the fight and made them commit. Allies are certainly taking advantage of their control of the Med by convoying me, although fortunately those rolls have been going pretty well for me so far. Otherwise, UK is well, what is it doing? It's building up here in Africa mostly. That's where it put its builds, trying to get that invasion force together so that it can eventually retake Cairo. And not much else going on in the Atlantic. What will happen on turn 5? Halfway through turn 5, Japan has juked its transports out there from Russia over to Alaska and the Aleutians. Give the Americans something to do. Taken back C-Zone 16 and kind of pushed the fleet out a little bit here, encompassing Philippines of the Ring, while pushing its land units inward toward China. Cut off this insurgency that we have here, got rid of the Russians finally. Still a sizable number of Chinese individuals up there in the corner, and they're spreading out. Will undoubtedly continue to do so, but some land units to deal with those. On the European front, the Russians are just out of control, taking Romania with force and with enough tanks to hold on to it. Why did Germany's line crumble so badly? Well, it's because Germany has decided to switch its emphasis, take advantage of the UK's weakness and the general lack of allies in the Atlantic, and push towards the sea line. That's 7. Yeah, we were only able to build 7 transports up there, given the amount of damage that I needed to fix on the factories, but 7 plus another is 8. The other ugliness here, the thing that I thought I could do to at least slow the advance here into Romania, is to throw 3 infantry and 3 bombers into Bessarabia to at least hopefully take those out, if not at least slow down the push there, the infantry that were in Bessarabia and the tanks, and buy me another turn. Well, that, not only did that not work out, I got 0 hits. He got 2 on his AA, shot down all my bombers, all my infantry, and now the soft underbelly of Europe is exposed. So that is a bad feeling. Will the Allies keep up that mojo on turn 5? Beginning of turn 6, and it is a live one. We still have Americans building up here, but this fleet didn't get to go anywhere because it had to come up here and deal with the Alaskans, which frankly suited my purposes just fine. They kind of had to do that because both of those territories were critical to a U.S. bonus. But the rest of the U.S. fleet not waiting and coming down to join the multinational force here in Queensland. It's quite a face-off there with the Japanese there in range and some more down yonder in C-Zone 6. On the Asian front, not a lot happened here. The Italians pulled back from the border of Persia, since those Russian planes kind of tipped the scales, built up here in Egypt to keep these folks away since they all moved into range, and everybody's on the brink of battle here. Italy, though, kind of turning a little bit of the momentum in the Med, with London on its last legs here, the Allied fleet coming back out of the Med. Italy able to finish off the 2 that were there and starting to build up a navy again. And all these subs, all these American and British forces saying, hey, wait a minute, why were we all the way on the opposite side of the Mediterranean when we should be defending London? Still, the Americans have a transport and 2 bombers that they just built, and that's what's coming. These guys here, this little multinational transport, everybody jumping on boats just like it's Dunkirk here, trying to get back to London in time on turn 6. Halfway through turn 6, we are unfortunately getting close to when we're going to have to call this, but we are inching along. The Japanese have built up their navy, pulled back a little bit in face of the American storm down there, rolling out some land units across Asia, battling back the Chinese insurgency. And on the European map, it is pathetic, people. So we opted to take Scotland, take the measured approach towards a sea lion. doing just enough to preserve that fleet so that they'll have a second strike capability to wipe out London, bombing them again into total submission with complete damage there. But in the meantime, allowing Russia to just get crazy in Europe as we knew they would. They're 60 something they're collecting with bonuses. These out of the box rules with 3 for every territory they take are just crazy. Boy, it is, it's debatable whether Germany should have just gone for broke on Sea Lion to be able to turn this tide back. But right now, Russia's getting way too much money, getting way too big. And will that carry the Allies forward on the rest of turn 6? It's the beginning of the 7th, and what we've agreed will unfortunately be the final turn due to time constraints today. But it's been an adventurous one. The U.S. taking the Japanese invitation to occupy the Philippines with every single thing that it's got. This being the last turn, I used all 6 of my kamikazes on those battleships, each of which are damaged. And we are about to have a showdown here in the Philippines on the final Japanese turn. On the European front and Asian front, China pushing out a little bit, as you know, one would expect it to do. The Japanese are there prepared to deal with it. The Middle East is kind of vacant. These folks here, the Americans got out of Dodge. The Japanese knocking on the door in the back, having reoriented its Air Force over here to India to put pressure there. Of course, now with Americans in the Philippines, sure would have been nice to have them where they were in Vietnam. That would have actually made a huge difference. But we didn't do that, did we? Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Italians have buffered up, brought back all the land units. Allies staying put in Sudan, while all of the Italian builds and air units went to northern Italy in a show of force to try and stop this Russian horde. The Italians were successful in knocking the Russians out of Albania, at least slowing down their southward progress. But all these guys knocking on the door of a currently empty Berlin. What is going to happen on this final turn? Will we plunge into London? Will Berlin fall on the Russian turn? Anything remains to be seen. All right, it's the end of the game here at the end of turn 7. So have we really each? I guess we went at least through the Japanese roll, and I'll explain what happened here. So on the Japanese turn, as expected, these guys jumped in. As it happened, the planes in India actually could make it. So it was a pretty handy Japanese victory here in the Philippines. That's 4 damaged battleships that lived, and several planes that all made it back here. So that's a good turn for the Japanese. Now this represents the Americans bringing what was in Hawaii down to Australia, and so that would have been the next matchup. Tons of transports there. A good chance we would have taken those into either Australia or the Philippines. Of course, you know, there's a lot of comeback there too. We've got a lot of subs up there. Anyway, there's some thinking to be done of how that would have gone. We didn't bother with the builds because we're out of time at this point, but that would have been all of the Americans' build there in the Pacific. But that's advantage. Japan would have gained a little bit of edge. We did the rolls in China, it's kind of stopping the advance, going to roll them back again. So slight edge to Japan there on the back and forth. Moved some stuff here to hold the line, but took the tanks and everything the opposite way rather than taking Persia. So that's cool and all. But here's where it gets interesting. So first of all, Germany's attack into London failed. In retrospect, did not make sense for me to continue that on the second turn. I should have done the first turn Sea Lion there when I could have. I didn't gain enough because I just wasn't able to commit. So would have been different if I brought every single thing that I could have in, maybe. But I left 6 guys behind to defend Berlin, and I used 2 planes in the sea battle to get rid of the British destroyer rather that was in 110. So that weakened me. It got down to this amount left in London. I retreated the 1 tank that was left and the planes who all landed here in Holland, and the bombers here in Western Germany. Russia responded by taking Berlin, so that's awful. And as Brad points out, if I would have won in London, he might have just taken that money too, so that would have been ridiculous. But here, Russia takes Berlin. It gets a 10 IPC bonus for doing that the first time. It still gets 3 for every one of these German territories that it's taking. So how many IPCs did Russia collect that last turn?
131.
131. Would have been more, but he got, convoyed for a couple. So that's insane. When a country is collecting 131, they're going to win the game. We played it out. We rolled real quick with the time we have left just to see what would have happened. Now, Italy, had to emergency fly out all of its planes from Egypt and take all its builds in northern Italy. So with these 6 mechs and 6 planes and a bomber, they would have easily taken out that 1 plane or that 1 tank in Berlin. The Germans would have come in, but they can't build because they got no money. So they end up with they got a lot of planes, and they could land those 2 mechs, and those bombers aren't going to do them a whole lot of good. And they could land some stuff in there, but with this mess, my money's on Russia taking Berlin back, and then Germany and Italy not being able to do anything about it. Could it gone differently? Could they have pulled it out again, taken Berlin back again? Maybe, but I doubt it. We also played this out, and because Italy scrambled all its planes out of Egypt, Britain was able to finally take Egypt back. Oh, yeah, and so we also, it's a given at this point. Once you shoot your shot at Sea Lion and fail, your transports are as good as dead, and we rolled that out just to confirm that that's exactly what would have happened, and that's how that rolled. So we were a little rushed here at the end, for sure, but, it's fair to say I made some poor strategic choices with that Sea Lion move. I thought I could hold off Russia and take Sea Lion. Neither of those things happened. Neither of us are using odds calculators, it should be said. Chris and I's games, we usually sit down and tabulate everything out. Here, we chose not to do that through the game, so we were eyeballing it, and that's a call that I made. So I'm willing to accept this as an Axis loss, even though Japan is going crazy and will for the foreseeable future. Germany is just not coming back from this. Italy, although Italy has been doing great for what Italy is, certainly can't hold it off all alone. The Atlantic is empty. Britain's not doing anything. U.S. isn't doing anything over here, but they really don't need to when Germany can't even hold on to Berlin. So that's a bad day for the Axis. It was going really well, honestly. When I took out Norway, I thought I was going to win. And frankly, if I hadn't done the Sea Lion move and I just slugged it out in Russia, U.S., UK, they weren't doing anything. They after Norway, they weren't going to accomplish anything. They weren't going to make any inroads. I should have just kept slugging it out with Russia. I thought I could make a quick juke over to London and bolster my fortunes that way, but it didn't work out, and Russia took advantage of it. Got anything to add?
Yeah. Let's see. It should be noted that obviously I have a lot more experience with this setup, and so all things considered, Brian did really, really well, especially with Italy. I think, Japan, you did really have a great game over here. You were able to almost kill China. Really, the only reason you didn't kill China was because I got lucky with putting some of the, Russians over here and just kind of pulling everything together. I almost brought some Russian planes over, but I decided against it. I didn't need them. And
that's not luck. That's resource allocation.
Yeah. But Japan had a good game, but I think you did best with Italy. The whole game. So my strategy as the Allies was kind of just to not lose. Generally speaking, with this setup, I've found that the U.S. especially needs to focus their attention on the stronger of the Axis. And so after the first round, I wasn't really sure who that was going to be, because Germany had I think Germany may have had a slightly better first turn because you're able to get some of those pot shots with the subs, you know. You're able to just walk over Leningrad, which that kind of happens in this setup. Japan, you were aggressive. I was expecting maybe a little bit more aggression, but you still did well. I think, like I said, at the end of round one, or halfway through round one, I was kind of leaning towards Germany, that Germany was going to do better. And so that's why initially I dumped all my American resources over there. Turns out the real problem over here was Italy, because the whole game, the British were just on their heels. I was trying to pull back from Egypt, pull back over here. I almost dumped the factories over here right to start, but I knew if I did that, you were going to probably go for a sea lion, and so I, dumped infantry there, and it was just kind of a delayed. So my British strategy was not very good. The way that you push with Italy over here the whole time just kept the British just stuck here. Really the MVP for the Allies was Russia, 100%. That battle, I think it was round 2 that was in Ukraine here, where there was just, we were about equal for tanks, I think. I just had a little bit more cannon fodder with infantry, and that was really what made the difference. And to your credit, I think Sea Lion, I probably would have done it. I was concerned about a turn or two before you did it, because the British were so stuck over here. I thought that, you might do it, and then when you put the transports in the water, I'm like, oh crap. It was just, fortune that my twos rolled well, and since you were focused over here the whole time, the Russians, I knew I had to push them as hard as I could, because really, like I said, the winner over here was Russia. The Americans and the British really did not do a whole lot.
Hard to argue with that when they're sitting there in Berlin. And all those tanks just rolling right in. This reminds me why in our house rules we neutered the Russian advantage down from 3 to 2 per territory, because you just were an unstoppable economic machine at that point. And I invited you to do it. I withdrew from that front in order to support the sea line. It's just that strategy didn't work out this time.
Well, and I was kind of playing I was watching the pace of the game, and I knew that Japan started off just a tad bit slow, but as soon as you took this, you made, 80-something that turn? And so I knew the U.S. has to go 100% Pacific, and that meant that it was either use the momentum I had with Russia and put the hurt on Germany for as long as I could, or if I waited even a turn or two, I think the Allies would have lost.
Well, I waited. If I was going to do the sea line, I waited one turn too long to do that, I think. And honestly, when I made the Scotland move and you poured so far into Europe, I should have bailed on sea line, left those guys in Scotland, pulled back the transport, save them for another day, and just build like crazy in Germany. If I had one more turn to build in Germany, it would not have fallen. Yeah. And I think I would have been able to turn the tide on those tanks. Things still would have been ugly, but we would have been at least at a standstill at this point in the game.
And I think it should be added, too, that it's not like you left these open. Like, you did exactly what I would have done. You left, some blockers here. It was just so quick, There was just so much stuff, and...
Yeah, well, when I'm pulling back and you're building tanks and then you're gaining money every turn when you're advancing, it's hard to stop that. I will say that one reason I felt like I could be aggressive with Italy and not have to build in Europe for most of the game with Germany is because these navies that were coming over were not very transport heavy, right? Like the one here in 91 had one transport at one point, and then it had none. There was one transport that came up here. So I was not afraid of a land invasion, right? I kept some guys in France just for a counterattack, but I kept nobody anywhere else. Italy was empty most of the game. That's what let me be aggressive over here. Now, it would have taken you more turns to build up those transports, and like you said, you were building up in the Pacific, so you had to make your choices. But that's just, when I perceive that, I'm like, okay, I can get away with that. I can focus on the land if there's no invasion force coming.
Well, and that's why I went for Norway with the U.S., because I knew I couldn't. I was really torn the first couple of turns with the U.S. because I could see Italy was going to just be a mess. And so initially, my fleet that I bought, I was going to bring in here. But then when I realized that I was going to have to do Pacific mostly, I went up to Norway knowing that if I could just hold that, I could keep a bunch of my bombers there. Because I knew at that point that the Russians were going to advance. So a really good... Something I found that works good here is when the Russians have that kind of momentum shift, if they take Ukraine, when they start making that push, what really helps them is if the Allies can take this and just start bombing Berlin. And that's exactly what I did.
You did, and that was certainly helpful. You bombed the crap out of those things.
Yep. Rest in peace, British bomber.
Yeah. But building that factory in Norway and then losing it, set you back.
Yep.
For sure.
But part of the reason I built the factory was because I was kind of surprised you had all of these German troops here, these forces that were in Leningrad, and I was starting to push. And part of the reason I built that factory there was because I wondered if you were gonna, because you brought some stuff here, and I wondered if you were gonna divert and do that. The whole time, kind of the interlude with just some piddly stuff from the U.S. and the British against Germany. The goal was really draw Germany's attention away from Russia, and obviously at some point there's just no other option. But the British are weak. I might be able to get London, and it just didn't work, unfortunately for you.
Yeah, well, if that's what you were baiting me into, it worked. When I went bomber, that's because I wanted to be able to pound Norway before you started building stuff in that factory, before you were able to land a lot. And still have, offensive units left over. So those bombers lived, and they were helpful, but weren't enough on their own.
Well, and the other thing that it did was, that was partly why I couldn't, the first couple of turns with the U.S., I had just a few ships and transports. But when you've got 5 or 6 bombers there, they're just projecting so much power, I couldn't do much.
Yeah, that's the idea. Bombers are great for Germany, for sure. All right.
I want to add one more thing that I guess something that scared me with the British as well. I at one point I thought that you were gonna bring everything through because I had just bought this factory. This was really more of just to try desperately to hold the line, and I thought you were gonna come through here. You had a really great how did that work? The Italians were in Alexandria, and you had a couple of German forces. And I thought you were going to blitz through to take this so that you could bring your Italian ships through, and you didn't for some reason. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I was there, and I don't know. I looked at it. I didn't think I could get enough there. We can roll the tape back and see if that would have been a good move, but I didn't want to, stuff like that, I didn't want to overextend too much, you know what I'm saying? I am aggressive with the Axis, and you have to be. But there's a point where it's too much, and you're extending yourself out, and you can't support it.
Yep. So,
and like I said, I wanted to save my carrier fleet by moving it into 81, but that didn't work out. Well, honestly, I'm not mad about it in retrospect, because it let me get all those guys in Syria, right, the second time that you couldn't fight off. And then it drew your whole Navy from 91 into 99, and that was fine for me because I knew at that point I was going to sea line.
Yep.
But, oh well. Great game. That was fun. I enjoyed the scenario. Enjoyed playing with you, Brad.
It's glad to be here. It's awesome to meet you and get a game together. It's super fun.
Yeah. YouTube Showdown in the Arsenal of Democracy. Detroit, Michigan. Signing out.